Next up is Phil. Phil is going to do, Phil actually won a first place at a National Model Railroad Association meet, a real contest winner. Phil doesn't like to call attention to himself and really hasn't presented too much in the past couple years, but he's quite a modeler. Proof is, if you win first place in a national contest, that's a nod that you might be a pretty fair modeler. So tonight he's going to show a model that he constructed with 3D printing and acrylic. So it's the acrylic part of it's, I mean, 3D, lots of people do 3D. He's did a unique application here, but the acrylic modeling is really something, I don't know that he um, ever showed this before, but it's an interesting way to build something. So Phil,
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, this was actually the models that were in the my build last time we did it. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to walk through essentially how I built this. We're going to do it in 4 segments, so it'll be about an hour. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So these I'm going to talk about 2 different buildings, but more importantly, just the techniques used there. So these are the 2 buildings. You saw this in the, like I said, in the my build. I took these both to a regional convention and a national convention. The national convention, the one on the right took first place. The one on the left took second place. Interesting enough, at the regional convention, the one on the right was best structure. The one on the left was best in show. So they kind of reversed each other in those two. Tonight, what I'm doing is just talk a little bit about kind of the thought process in building these, because I think one of the things when you build a structure like this, having a real design for why it was built and what it was for is important. So I started off with a couple of pictures of what the buildings look like. When you look at them very closely, they are very realistic. One of the things, obviously, we talked about interiors on the my build. Did complete interiors on them on both of the buildings. So they have a great deal of focus. One of the things, as you notice in the bottom right picture, these are on a module, and I'll show that in a moment. So they're actually right at the edge of the module. So literally, the building is within 6 inches of where the public is standing. So when we take these to shows, this is something that the public can actually see up close and see the kind of modeling that you can do, and you typically only see on a layout. So talk a little bit about why I built these. I'm part of an ON30 group out here in California called the California Central Coast. I'd started off in that by building the module you see on the upper 3 pictures. This is actually a kind of a continuation of when I was a model railroader back in the 80s and early 90s, and I was doing HO, Sierra Railway, kind of Sierra Mountains in California. Really had that as a thought process. The first module I built was called Sierra City, and was built around the concept of a little town in the Sierras. And actually, the town itself was called Sierra City, so that kind of makes sense. Um, Basically, it was a way to start building and get a model built. As I began to build models, additional modules, um, I did a tunnel module, which is on the bottom left, and I began to look around for a tunnel in the area of the California Central Coast and found that there was a very interesting tunnel that ran through a hill in Santa Cruz, and it's actually still there, and it's used by the current railroad that runs from Felton, which is up in the mountains, out to the coast in Santa Cruz. So if you take that train, you'll actually go through this tunnel, and it's called the Mission Hill Tunnel because the reason it was built was that the original Spanish mission in Santa Cruz was on a hill right next to downtown. The tracks ran through downtown on the main street. The city told the railroad you need to move the tracks out of downtown. And they ended up building a 907-foot tunnel underneath the mission. So the bottom left really was to try to recreate that. And what I did was took a bunch of photos of the area and actually tried to model it so it actually looked like the photos. And on the module, I've got photos of the area so you can actually see what it looks like and how it compares. Then the bottom right, which is the photo I used behind me on the Zoom meetups, is actually a model of what's called Wilder Ranch, which is now a state park north of Santa Cruz. This is pretty typical of what happened in this area where when the railroads wanted to go through, the farmers had to give permission to go across their land. So to do that, the railroad would basically give them two things. They would give them a siding so they could ship their goods, and they give them a whistle stop so the wife could get to town. So this is actually a recreation of the Wilder Ranch, what would have been the siding there. Wilder was actually a creamery, so the building on the right is a creamery, and on the left there's a stockyard. I wanted to do a stockyard. This is the Banta stockyard. I thought it was pretty cool. So I'd gotten to that point, and then two things happened. I bought a 3D printer. Um, Turns out 3D printers are relatively inexpensive, and they're really cool for model railroading. I'm going to do a set of segments probably in a month or so on a new module I'm building and doing, for example, all the control panels have been 3D printed. Do some pretty amazing control panels with 3D printing. And at the same time, I joined the NMRA and I started seeing some pretty amazing modeling when I went to some NMRA events. The model on the right is actually Earl Gerbavon, who's an MMR out here in California. He got his MMR, I think, early last year or late in the year before in 23. And that began to inspire me to do better modeling. So I really kind of got excited about those things and about what you could do. So I decided to do a new module. And the new module really needed to fulfill a set of needs for the club, which was having additional modules. We had done a little bit of operations as a group, and we set up at a few events. Wanted to have some new scenes and wanted to be focused on, again, this California Central Coast, the area there, basically south of San Francisco for about 100 miles down the coast. I wanted a set of components. I won't read through those, but I wanted a ship scene. I really got excited about Frenchman's model. Frenchman's River has a car float that is pretty cool in ON30. Um, Wanted to have some switching operations. And I ended up doing a bunch of designs. As I got the designs processed along, I actually engaged at a regional event with some OPSIG members. They made some suggestions about the track plan. And then I did, if you haven't ever done it, there's a OPSIG, the RIOPS groups.io, which is essentially the OPSIG's online community. And I put up the plan and I ended up getting, I think, 37 responses and made some really good points. If you're doing a layout, you want to get some great feedback. It's a great way to get feedback. One of the things I had not done was put a place to store idler cars by the car float. And so the idea of putting that in was added in. So in the end, this is what I ended up coming up with. This is basically a 12-foot by 2-foot, 4-foot, 2-foot 4-inch module. Actually, two modules. See the picture on the bottom. This was taken actually about a year ago. It's a bit more finished now. The idea here is that you have a set of buildings that relate to the area. It's the Spreckles Sugar Warehouse, which is down there at the bottom right. It turns out Spreckles was a sugar baron. He started in Hawaii. He was really a leader in creating in the area there along the coast sugar beets as a way to produce sugar, and built a huge sugar beet processing plant and encouraged a lot of the farmers to move to sugar beets. One of the problems they had was the sugar processing is actually a multi-stage process. What they did in Hawaii was they reduced the sugar from cane to raw sugar. The raw sugar was shipped from Hawaii to San Francisco, where it was processed into consumer sugar. So that would be, granular sugar, powdered sugar, etc. The different kinds of sugar you would have. The problem that he had when he did the facility in actually in Salinas, was where the first factory was built, was he had to ship the sugar, which was raw sugar, from that factory to San Francisco for processing, and that had to be shipped on, do a bit of a drum roll here, the Southern Pacific. And the Southern Pacific, as many of you may have heard, was called the octopus because it was a monopoly in California and had very high transport rates. So actually, as you're going to see in a moment, there was a pier here in Moss Landing that was actually used to ship sugar. So what I've done is created a warehouse, and this has two reasons. One is it's a great modeling opportunity. but also from an operations perspective, it creates a place to move a lot of cars, because it turns out if you look at the number of carloads it takes to fill a ship up, it's actually a lot of carloads. So the idea was a warehouse to get the sugar put in while it was being moved to the ships. Then I wanted to do a building with a track inside, so I came up with Daniel's Transfer Company. Daniel's Transfer Express was actually a company in the Santa Cruz area in the early 1900s that did shipping and movement. Um, then, if you look to the left, there's the Hobden Cannery. The Hobden Cannery is actually the cannery that became the Monterey Bay Aquarium. So it's actually a very recognizable structure, and you're going to see some pictures of that in a moment. Then I wanted to do a fuel pier. So I actually found the Standard Oil fuel pier, which was in Monterey, and have modeled that as the prototype. And then you see the car float on the upper left. So essentially that was the layout plan for the module that I was building the buildings to. Um, as I looked around for where to do this, one of the things I found was there was this very interesting place at Moss Landing. I actually kind of laid out what I wanted on the module and then found a location that really fit. It turns out Moss Landing, which is again south of San Francisco, about 75 miles down the coast, it was actually the place the Salinas River ran out to the ocean until 1906. When the earthquake hit in 1906, the river actually changed and ran out about 5 miles farther down the coast. And this bay, or whatever you would call it, for at Moss Landing, silted up. And it actually was silted up and closed to the ocean until the late 40s, when it was dredged as part of the creating new harbors for fishing in the United States. What I've actually presupposed here by recreation of history, again, we get to do that as model railroaders, is that this was never happened, that actually the river continued to go through Moss Landing, therefore it was open to the coast, and they actually dredged out the harbor there. If you've ever been to Moss Landing, right in front of this area, if you look at where all the green boxes are in the picture to the right, is actually where there's now a Duke Energy power plant. So this is literally right in front of that. And if you look on the left, the little photo on the left, which comes from Santa Cruz Trains, which is a guy online who did a lot of documentation of this area and trains in this area, is you can actually see the Pajaro Valley Consolidated Railroad, which runs from the north end, the top of the slide picture, down through, and you can actually see the Y there that runs out across to the sandbar, and then you can see the pier or the wharf that ran out into the ocean. So there was actually a railroad here, and it actually ran right in the area where on the right, you'll see that I've actually positioned the pieces of the module. So what I was able to do was take what I wanted to do on a module and find a prototype area to put the module together on. And of course, that let me do a lot of things in terms of going and taking photographs and actually using prototypical things in building the models. I put in a couple of pictures just because I thought there might be some interest in kind of building large modules like this. We have the advantage. One of our members owns a cabinet shop, so we build the modules in a cabinet shop. You'll notice on the right, if you look on the right, you'll notice that the basic framing of the module is a cabinet face with 1/4-inch plywood on it, and then sides put on that. And that framing actually makes these incredibly reliable, incredibly strong, and they last a long time. I like leg pockets, so you'll see there are leg pockets there. What I did was I decided to do, because I wanted to have the water level significantly lower than the track level, it's actually built with 2-inch foam across the whole module, actually 2.5 inches of foam. So everything was built to have that foam put in place. One of the big problems you have when you put 2.5 inches of foam plus a little bit of plywood, and then you put some track work on top, you now have 3 inches between where you can mount a turnout motor and where you actually have the turnout. And that 3 inches becomes really hard to go through and get things to work properly. So one of the things I did was put, wherever there was a turnout, there's actually a box that takes the turnout up to a level that's about 1/2 inch of foam on top of that. So it's actually uniform to the rest of the module, but that recesses all the turnouts. So if you look on the right, you can see the recessed turnouts. The other thing I did was I decided that I wanted the buildings to be removable. So when I built the module, I actually built in boxes that you can see here that have in them a piece of plywood that was pre-cut, and then I built the box around the plywood so that I could drop in the buildings and take them off. What I found is when you put these things in a trailer, I typically rent a U-Haul trailer, especially if you rent one of the double axle ones, which when I get into having all the modules I needed to do, they're designed to carry 3 or 4 thousand pounds or 3,000 pounds. When you put 400 or 500 pounds of modules in them, they have no suspension. Yes, you can let air out of the tires. I do that regularly when I rent a trailer, but they still tend to get beat up pretty good. So when I decided if I was going to build really detailed models, I wanted to be able to take them off of the layout and move them. So what you see kind of in the middle there is what this looked like after the foam was added on top of the base, and then you can see where it runs across where the turnouts are located. So this is just another picture of how this progressed. This is the module now with basic landscaping on it. I tend to use Sculpt-A-Mold, again, because these are going in the public, and the public does have a tendency to reach their fingers over the edge. Having raw foam, I don't think is a great idea, so I use Sculpt-A-Mold on everything. In fact, the module I'm using now, I bought 2 bags of Sculpt-A-Mold to actually cover everything with Sculpt-A-Mold. The reason I put this picture is you can see how the buildings were built in. You can see the boxes that were built there to hold the basic frame. And then what I did was I took a piece of masonite and cut it to the footprint of the building and glued it to that block of plywood that was underneath. So now I have a place I can drop in a building and it sits in exactly the same position every time, but it can be removed and then be put into a case. One of the things
Hey,
I did was, yes.
Phil, you got a minute, so
Okay, I've got 3 or 4 more slides, then I'll be done.
1 minute. Yeah.
So I took a bunch of pictures. I went and found a bunch of pictures of different things in the area. I'll talk about these in a little more detail. One of the things that was really cool was in 1906, something happened in the Bay Area and in this part of California. Turned out that caused a lot of pictures to be taken. So what you see in that picture at the upper left there is actually a view from the mainland out towards the ocean. This was actually the end of the Y that went out across, and you can see then on the upper right, the picture back at the mainland. I talked about this before. I put these into a PowerPoint to put them all together. And these are actually the designs of the buildings. And so the 2 buildings I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to go into detail next week, starting with the building on the left, which is the one that has the acrylic framing. These are the 2 buildings. So that's it.